I'm Delaney, and I grew up in the shadow of a star, my older sister, Brielle. Our house was always full of people, aunts, uncles, cousins, you name it. They would pour into our backyard like ants to a picnic, all drawn by my mom's famous barbecue and, of course, the chance to see Brielle perform. Our backyard was like a stage. The neatly trimmed lawn and the big oak tree made the perfect setting. Dad would fire up the grill, the smell of charcoal and sizzling meat filling the air, while Mom hustled around, making sure everyone had a drink in their hand. Brielle, sweetie, and Marge would call out, her voice easily rising above the chatter. Why don't you sing us a little something? Like magic, all eyes would turn to my sister. Brielle would hop onto a chair, her golden curls bouncing, with that mischievous glint in her eye. She'd clear her throat dramatically, and then she'd begin. She'd belt out, "My heart will go on," doing her best Celine Dion impression. The adults would go wild, clapping and cheering as if they were at a concert. Mom and Dad would beam with pride. Dad would often wipe away a tear from his eye. Meanwhile, I'd be standing off to the side, trying to blend into the background. It wasn't that I didn't want to join in, but every time I tried to sing, it sounded like a cat being strangled. And poetry? Forget about it. The words would get all tangled up in my mouth, leaving me red-faced and stammering. I overheard my relatives whisper about how different I was from my sister. It wasn't just them. My parents made it pretty clear who the star of the family was. While Brielle went from dance classes to singing lessons to art workshops, I was mostly left to figure things out on my own. Not that I minded much. I found comfort in the dusty old books that lined our shelves. The only person who seemed to understand me was my great-aunt Soraya. She'd often find me hiding behind the garage or sitting in the treehouse with my nose buried in a book. "What adventure are you on today, Delaney?" she'd ask, settling down beside me. I'd look up, grateful for the company. "Oh, just reading about ancient Egypt," I'd say, showing her the cover of my latest find. Soraya would nod, her eyes twinkling. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, girl. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Those moments with Aunt Soraya felt like a balm for my soul. She didn't expect me to perform or try to be someone I wasn't. With her, I could just be me, Delaney, the quiet, bookish girl who preferred paper and ink to the chaos of family gatherings. But as much as I loved those moments, they couldn't take away the sting of being the forgotten child. Every time Brielle mastered a new song or won another award, my parents showered her with praise and gifts, new clothes, the latest gadgets, you name it. And me? I got hand-me-downs and sighs of exasperation. School became my safe place. I wasn't exactly Miss Popularity, but I found my rhythm in the classroom. I wasn't content to just sit there and listen. No, I wanted to truly understand everything the teacher said. "Mrs. Thompson," I'd say after class, my voice quiet but steady, "could you explain that part about mitosis again? I didn't quite get it." She'd smile, obviously pleased with my interest. "Of course, Delaney. Why don't we go over it together?" If a teacher didn't have the time, I'd ask for book recommendations. Soon, my backpack was always bulging with extra reading material. I stayed up late, poring over those books, determined to learn everything I could. All that hard work paid off. By the time I got to high school, I was top of my class. For once, I was the best at something. I even made a few friends, other bookworms who didn't mind my quiet ways. As graduation approached, our house became Brielle Central. Mom was always helping her put together her portfolio for the fancy advertising and PR program she was applying to. "Oh, honey, this campaign idea is perfect." Mom would gush, looking over Brielle's work. "You're so talented." I'd roll my eyes and retreat to my room, burying myself in my studies. But one night, during yet another family dinner devoted to Brielle's college plans, something inside me snapped. "I'm going to college too." I blurted out. "I want to study management." The silence that followed was crushing. And then, to my shock and pain, they all burst out laughing. "Oh, sweetie," Mom said, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. "We don't have the money for that. You'll need to get a job after graduation. You're just not as gifted as your sister." It felt like a slap. But I'm the top student in my class. I stammered, my face burning with anger and embarrassment. I get straight A's. I stormed up to my room and grabbed my report card. Marching back downstairs, I slammed it onto the table. They all leaned in, their eyes widening in surprise. Well, I'll be damned, Dad muttered, scratching his head. When did this happen? It's been happening for years. I spat, my voice shaking. Not that any of you noticed. Mom looked ashamed, at least. Delaney, we had no idea, but Dad cut her off. Look, it doesn't change anything. We've spent all our savings on Brielle's education. There's nothing left for you, Delaney. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. You'll go work at my cousin Frank's restaurant after graduation. I didn't say another word. I turned and ran upstairs, ignoring their calls, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. As I collapsed onto my bed, sobs racking my body, I felt something inside me harden. Fine, I thought. I'll find a way. With or without them, I clenched my hands into fists, feeling the weight of my frustration. If they won't help me, I'll find another way. I'll show them what Delaney can do. The next few months passed in a blur. Brielle headed off to college, her departure marked by tearful goodbyes and proud hugs from our parents. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my studies with a new sense of purpose. I was determined to graduate at the top of my class, no matter what. During this time, I found myself spending more and more time with great Aunt Soraya. Her cozy, little house became my escape from the tension that filled our home. One afternoon, as we sat together in her warm, sunlit kitchen sipping tea, she asked me the question I had been dreading. So, Delaney, she said gently, her kind eyes locked on mine. What are your plans after graduation? I stared into my teacup, fighting back the tears that were threatening to fall. I don't know, Aunt Soraya, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom and Dad won't help me with college. They say there's no money left after paying for Brielle's education. Aunt Soraya was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Delaney, dear, I've got some savings. I'd like to give them to you for college. You're as smart as they come, and I'll be damned if I let that brilliant mind of yours go to waste. Her words hit me like a tidal wave. I couldn't stop the tears from falling as I realized that my dream of going to college wasn't dead after all. Thank you, I sobbed, throwing my arms around her. Thank you so much, Aunt Soraya. The next few months flew by, and before I knew it, I was walking across the stage at graduation, diploma in hand. As I looked out into the audience, I saw Aunt Soraya beaming at me with pride. My parents were there too, but they looked more uncomfortable than proud. That evening, as I was poring over college brochures, Mom came into my room. Delaney, honey, she said in a voice that was too sweet, your father's cousin Frank called. He's got a waitressing job for you at his restaurant. Isn't that exciting? I took a deep breath and faced her. Actually, Mom, I won't be needing that job. I'm going to college. Dad appeared in the doorway, frowning. And how exactly do you plan on paying for that? He asked, crossing his arms. Aunt Soraya is helping me, I replied, lifting my chin in defiance. She's giving me her savings to cover my tuition. The room fell silent. My parents stared at me in shock, and then, to my disbelief, Dad's face turned red with anger. Absolutely not, he shouted. If Soraya has money to spare, it should go to Brielle. She needs a car for her job after she graduates next year. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious? I spat, my voice rising. This is my chance to get an education and make something of myself. Don't be selfish, Delaney, Mom chimed in. Your sister needs that money more than you do. No, I said, my voice trembling but firm. This is my money now, and I'm using it for college. End of discussion. From that moment on, life at home became unbearable. My parents either ignored me or snapped at me over the smallest things. The tension was suffocating. After one particularly nasty argument, I called Aunt Soraya in tears and told her everything. Pack your bags, sweetheart, she said without hesitation. You're moving in with me. The next day, I packed everything I owned into a cab and left my childhood home behind. As I watched it shrink in the rearview mirror, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. When we pulled up to Aunt Zariah's house, I knew I was finally free. The summer flew by in a whirlwind of preparation, and before I knew it, I was stepping onto the campus of State University. Thanks to my stellar grades and Aunt Zariah's generosity, I had gotten into the management program I had always dreamed of. My first day of classes was a blur of excitement. As I sat in my introduction to business lecture, I couldn't help but think, I made it. I'm really here, Meanwhile, Brielle was starting her senior year at her fancy college. I hadn't heard much from her or my parents since I moved out, but I tried not to let it bother me. I was too busy enjoying my newfound freedom and the excitement of college life. Then, about a month into the semester, Aunt Zariah called. "Delaney, dear," she said, her voice hesitant. "I think you should sit down for this." My heart raced as she filled me in on the family drama I had missed. Apparently, Brielle had shown up at home out of the blue, announcing that she had dropped out of college. The reason? She was pregnant. According to Aunt Zariah, Brielle had been flippant about the whole thing, saying, "Oh, don't worry. The baby's father is loaded. We'll be getting married soon." But the story didn't end there. It turned out Brielle's boyfriend wasn't as committed as she thought. When he found out she had been seeing one of his friends, everything fell apart. Now, they didn't even know who the father was. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process it all. Part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. The golden child had fallen from her pedestal. But mostly, I just felt sad for Brielle and the mess she had gotten herself into. The drama continued over the next few months. Aunt Zariah kept me updated on all the gossip from family gatherings, but I was too focused on building my own future to get caught up in the chaos. For the first time in my life, I was in control of my own destiny. And it felt amazing that I no longer attended family gatherings after Brielle's baby was born. A DNA test confirmed that her boyfriend was the father, but instead of the fairy tale wedding Brielle had imagined, he only agreed to pay child support. The final blow came when Brielle, desperate for work, took a job as a waitress at Uncle Frank's restaurant, the very job my parents had tried to push on me years earlier. When I hung up the phone after hearing this news, I felt a mix of emotions. There was a small, petty part of me that wanted to gloat, to rub my success in my family's faces. But mostly, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for where I was and how far I had come. 4 years flew by in a whirlwind of lectures, exams, and late-night study sessions. Before I knew it, I was walking across the stage at graduation, proudly holding my hard-earned management degree. As I scanned the crowd, I spotted Aunt Zariah, her face glowing with pride and tears in her eyes. Thanks to my top grades and glowing recommendations from my professors, I had already secured a job as a manager at the Gilded Fork, one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city. The salary was more than I had ever dreamed of, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly successful. With my first paycheck, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I marched into the electronics store and bought the latest smartphone for Aunt Zariah. When I gave it to her, her eyes lit up. "Oh, Delaney," she gasped, turning the sleek device over in her hands. "This is too much." I grinned. "Not at all. Now let me show you how to use it." Over the next few weeks, I taught Aunt Zariah how to navigate social media. She took to it faster than I expected, especially loving Facebook's video feature. Soon, her page was filled with clips of her garden, her cat, and her famous apple pie in various stages of baking. I'd watch her videos during my lunch breaks, always leaving a comment or a like. It became our way of staying connected, even when work kept me busy. One day, as I was preparing for the dinner rush, my phone buzzed. I glanced down, surprised to see my mother's name on the screen. We hadn't spoken in years. "Delaney," she began, her voice hesitant. "We were hoping you might come over to talk." After a long pause, I agreed. That Sunday, I found myself standing on the porch of my childhood home, my hand hovering over the doorbell. Before I could press it, the door swung open. "Delaney!" My mother pulled me into a tight hug. "Oh, sweetie, it's so good to see you." Inside, I found my father, Brielle, and a little toddler who I assumed was my niece. The atmosphere was tense, but not hostile, like I had feared. "You look good, kiddo," my dad said, his voice gruff but warm. "We hear you're doing well for yourself." "I am," I replied, still feeling cautious. "I'm a manager at the Gilded Fork now." Their eyes widened at the mention of the restaurant's name. My mom cleared her throat. That's wonderful, dear. Actually, that's part of why we wanted to talk to you." Over the next hour, my parents apologized for how they had treated me, admitting they had been wrong to dismiss my potential. Then came the real reason for the reunion. "Delaney," my mom said, glancing at Brielle. We were wondering if you might be able to help Brielle get a job at your restaurant." I looked over at my sister, who was bouncing her daughter on her knee, avoiding eye contact. "I'll see what I can do," I said finally. "No promises, but I'll ask." True to my word, I spoke to Mr. Lawson, the owner of the Gilded Fork, about giving Brielle a chance. To my surprise, he agreed to hire her as an administrator. Brielle started the following week. At first, I watched her closely, half expecting her to fail or stir up some drama. But to my shock, she excelled. She was punctual, efficient, and the customers loved her charm. As the weeks passed, I found myself relaxing around her. We weren't best friends, but we developed a cordial working relationship. Just when I thought I had everything figured out, life threw me a curveball, but this time, it was a good one. One afternoon, Mr. Lawson called me into his office. My heart raced, wondering if I had done something wrong. But instead, he grinned and said, "Delaney, how would you like to help me expand the business?" Before I knew it, I was overseeing the opening of 3 new restaurants. My days became a whirlwind of meetings, menu tastings, and planning. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and everything I had ever dreamed of. The promotion came with a significant pay raise, and suddenly, I had more money than I knew what to do with. That's when the calls from my parents started. At first, it was small things. "The roof is leaking," my mom would say, her voice hesitant. "We were wondering if you might be able to help out." I was surprised by how good it felt to say yes, to be able to solve their problems with just a transfer of money. It started with the roof, then a new water heater, and before long, I was funding a full home renovation. As their financial situation improved thanks to my help, the infamous family parties began again. But this time, when I attended, things were different. "Have you heard about Delaney's latest project?" Mom would gush to the relatives. "She's opening a new restaurant downtown. We're so proud of her." I'd catch Brielle's eye across the room, and she'd give me a small smile. She was doing well, too, having been promoted to head administrator at the Gilded Fork. "My girls," Dad would say, draping an arm around each of us. Both of them making their old man proud. Part of me wanted to hold on to the bitterness, to remind them of how they treated me before. But a larger part of me was warmed by their approval, something I had craved for so long. As I drove home that night, a sense of contentment washed over me. I finally had everything I had ever wanted, success in my career and the love and appreciation of my family. I was the golden child now, but more importantly, I was my own person, standing on my own 2 feet. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon when my world came crashing down around me. I was casually scrolling through Facebook, sipping my morning coffee, when I noticed that Aunt Soraya had posted a new video. It was from one of the family gatherings I had missed due to work. Smiling, I clicked play, expecting to see the usual scenes of laughter and chatter. But what I saw instead made my blood run cold. There, in full view, were my parents, their faces flushed with alcohol and arrogance. My mom was waving her hands around, her voice slurred but unmistakable. "And Delaney? That ungrateful little freeloader," she was saying. "She barely gives us anything. We're not made of money, you know." Then my dad chimed in, his face red. "That's right. We're doing just fine, thanks to our Brielle. She's the one keeping that fancy restaurant afloat. Delaney just rides on her coattails." The video continued, with various relatives nodding in agreement and even adding their own hurtful comments. Brielle sat in the corner, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing to contradict them. When the video ended, I sat there in stunned silence. How could they? After everything I had done for them, how could they say such awful, untrue things? With trembling hands, I scrolled down to the comments. Among them, I saw messages from my parents, frantically telling Aunt Zariah to delete the video. "Zariah, take this down right now. You had no right to post this." But Aunt Zariah's response made me burst into tears. "I don't know how to delete videos," she had written. "And even if I did, I wouldn't. It's time everyone saw the truth about how you treat Delaney. She's the one supporting you, and this is how you repay her kindness? Shame on you both." I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying the video and reading the comments over and over again. The betrayal cut deep, reopening wounds I thought had long since healed. Finally, I picked up the phone and called Aunt Zariah. "Oh, Delaney, dear," she answered, her voice filled with sympathy. "I take it you've seen the video?" "Yeah," I croaked, my throat raw from crying. "I can't believe it, Aunt Zariah."
"How could they?"
I could hear the anger in her voice as she replied. "They've always been like this, Delaney. You just haven't been around to see it. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way, but maybe it's for the best. You deserve to know the truth." We talked for hours, with Aunt Zariah comforting me as I cycled through shock, anger, and grief. As night fell, I made a decision. "I'm cutting them off," I told her, my voice firm despite the pain in my heart. "No more money. No more help. They made their bed. Now they can lie in it." The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from my parents, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Their cruel and untrue words played on a loop in my mind. Finally, after a week of silence, I sent them a brief text. "Asterisk, I've seen the video. I know what you really think of me. Don't contact me again. The money stops now, asterisk." Their responses flooded in immediately. At first, they were apologetic. "Delaney, sweetie, we're so sorry. We didn't mean any of it. Please forgive us." But as I continued to ignore them, their tone shifted. "We're your parents. You owe us." Each message twisted the knife deeper, but I stood firm. I had given them chance after chance, and they had thrown it all back in my face. It was time to break the cycle. Brielle, surprisingly, stayed out of it. At work, she remained the model employee, efficient and professional. If she harbored any resentment over the loss of our parents' financial support, she didn't show it. Our interactions remained cordial but distant. "I'm not taking sides," she told me one day after a staff meeting. "This is between you and them." I nodded, appreciating her neutrality, even though part of me wished she would stand up for me. But I understood. She had her own child to think about now. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself leaning heavily on Aunt Zariah. Our Sunday video calls became the highlight of my week. She would regale me with stories about her garden or her latest baking adventure, providing much-needed normalcy in the chaos that my life had become. "You're doing the right thing, Delaney," she would assure me whenever doubts crept in. "Don't let them manipulate you anymore." To my surprise, other relatives began reaching out to me as well. My cousin Sarah, who had always been kind to me at family gatherings, sent me a heartfelt email. "I saw the video," she wrote. "I want you to know I think you're amazing, Delaney. What you've achieved, how you've helped everyone. You're an inspiration. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Uncle Holden, my dad's brother, even called me out of the blue. "Kid," he said, "I've watched you grow up into this incredible woman. Your parents are fools if they can't see how special you are. You've got family in your corner. Remember that." These messages of support were like a balm for my wounded heart. I realized that while I might have lost my parents, I had gained a family who truly appreciated me for who I was. As the year drew to a close, Mr. Lawson called me into his office. Nervously, I wondered if the family drama had somehow affected my work performance. But instead, he smiled broadly. "Delaney, I'm retiring next year," he said. "I want you to take over as CEO of the restaurant group." I stood there, shocked into silence. Finally, I managed to stammer out, "Are you sure?" He nodded, his eyes twinkling. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You've earned this, Delaney. You're the reason this business has flourished. It's time you took the reins." As I left his office, my head spinning with possibilities, I realized something profound. The little girl who had been overlooked and underestimated had grown into a woman who had not only met but surpassed everyone's expectations, including her own.